Greetings ladies and gentlemen, Adrian here, welcome back to the channel. So we know that the Secret World is going to relaunch in the coming weeks, and combat is a big part of what they're improving with the relaunch. The combat system in this game is probably the most talked about thing besides the story when it comes to the Secret World. From what I've seen, you either hate it or you tolerate it. Some of the words used to describe the game's combat system includes boring, repetitive, stiff, clunky, a chore, and the list goes on. I've never come across large portions of the player base that actually endorses the combat. I'm here to investigate the current state of the combat in the game and find some answers for you folks, especially if you're curious about the Secret World's combat and have never played it before. Is it really as bad as most folks say it to be? I guess the best place to start is with myself. What do I think about the combat, considering I'm a lifetime subscriber to this game? For me to explain how I feel about the system, I have to go way back in time. I've been following the Secret World since 2011 and have been playing since closed beta, when Ragnar Turnquist was still the man at the helm. At the time period, mind you, late 2011 to early 2012, much of what I saw was gameplay footages from conventions where Funcom teased the game. I fell in love with it because of the story and what the game stood for: secret societies, Lovecraftian myth. I loved the game's everything in the kitchen sink approach. Combat, I thought, was just a means to an end to progress the story. I guess I was naive back then. Looking back at it now, I thought the combat and animations were okay for the time period. Now when you see the caliber of other MMORPGs that released either in the same year or shortly after, I can honestly say that yes, there are a few issues, but my take on the system is that these issues are made up of several different parts of a larger mechanic, such as the meta progression involving the skill wheel and weapons, and not just the animations itself. So let's dive in and try to piece this puzzle together. What is it exactly that's making the combat unplayable for many? As said earlier, I believe it's a combination of things within the combat system that results in a frustrating experience for players. The first is also the most obvious, and it's the animations. Funcom consistently uses their Dreamworld engine across their MMOs, and it was developed circa the year 2000 with tweaks and upgrades since. While the Dreamworld engine is able to render beautiful environments as seen on Age of Conan and the Secret World, unfortunately the character models and animations are poor. If the Secret World is your first and only MMORPG or RPG game, then you wouldn't notice this, but if you've been around the MMORPG block, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Simple animations like running and jumping and strafing feel stiff and uninspiring, and participating in combat only accentuates it further. Some weapons such as guns are ranged and doesn't affect players as much, but others, especially melee weapons such as swords and hammers, are guilty of feeling stiff. Using your skills up close doesn't have the weight required to give players the feeling that it's actually making a difference. The animations during combat is also not helped at all by the skill repetition, which brings us to the next point: the game's builder and spender skills mechanic for combat. In the Secret World, players are able to use a combination of any of the 500 plus skills on the skill wheel for combat. But regardless of what your main weapons are, be it melee or ranged, all players are forced into the builder and spender mechanic for the combat. Each weapon has builder skills that, when used, puts a resource on the enemy target. When the resource hits the cap of 5, players can then use a much more powerful skill which consumes all the resources on the target to do more damage. This resource consuming skills are called spenders. The problem begins with the builder skills. Building resources involves spamming usually one or two skills over and over until you meet the requirement to use a spender. When playing solo, and especially in later zones when the difficulty curve gets higher, monsters and mobs in the world also get higher morale pools, which simply means all you're doing is repeatedly spamming the same builders but only longer. When combined with the issue of animations and having to watch your character mundanely do the same few skills over and over again, that's how the frustration usually starts, and you can begin to understand why players say the combat can be repetitive and boring. And the reason why players can't shake out of the boring, repetitive combat loop is because the Secret World only offers you limited skill slots to build your skill decks. Excluding the one skill slot afforded for auxiliary weapons, you are given 7 slots. Out of the 7, 4 will be builders and spenders for each weapon, single target and AoE usually. And the other 3 are usually reserved for an oh shit heal button, an ultimate ability with the imperative stun and interrupt, and finally a buff or boon skill. And that's it really. The huge skill wheel and the ability to swap builds on the fly, in my opinion, serves as an illusion that you are shaking things up and changing how you approach combat. To a certain extent, this is true, because you will require different builds and effects to defeat enemies depending on the zone, dungeon, or nightmare boss you're up against. But the meta still doesn't change. 4 skills out of the 7 are builders and spenders, and these are absolutely necessary to start any DPS going on enemy mobs. Players are still doing the same routine with their rotations due to the limited skill slots and must endure the issues we've already talked about, repetition. If the game gave us more skill slots, would that make things better? It's really hard to say. Sure, rotations would be different then because players can add in a lot more skills and utilities at the risk of making the game easier, but the underlying problem would still exist because it revolves around the basics of building and spending. And last but not least, the final nail in the coffin with regard to the combat system for many players is the AEGIS system. Introduced with issue 9 Tokyo back in 2014, the AEGIS system is a combat mechanic that covers all mobs in Tokyo with an energy shield. Players have to equip the appropriate controllers and level them up in order to effectively reduce the shield to 0 before they can start damaging their health. If you don't finish off the shield in time, they regenerate. In other words, a health bar on top of a health bar. Now take into consideration the last 3 points we talked about. Can anyone tell me what the problem is here? The AEGIS system was supposed to offer players entering Tokyo a fresh and difficult challenge. Unfortunately, mobs weren't hard to beat because they had new skills and moves that players needed to counter, but instead got a brand new colorful shield that players must now grind to be effective at dealing with, on top of changing their usual decks and rotations. I have a strong feeling that most players who already struggled with the Secret World's combat took serious issue to the AEGIS system, and it's easy to see why. When you put all the points we talked about together and imagine doing it repeatedly, you get the final result, which is what the Secret World's combat system is today. A lot of us, myself included, still play the game even though the combat is in this state, but I can certainly empathize now, so I think Funcom has some serious work to do with the relaunch. But what exactly can they do? As far as animations go, it's too little too late to change the game's engine now, so we're gonna be stuck with the same animations, if not upgraded or polished further in the future. But the rest absolutely needs a fix to address the boring and repetitive concerns for combat. And that's my take on why many players are left feeling frustrated and unsatisfied with the Secret World's combat system. But what about you? What do you think? Do you agree that it's a combination of the systems mentioned, or is there something more? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, and perhaps some suggestions as to how Funcom can fix this. As for now, let's cross our fingers and see what Funcom has in store for the relaunch and the tweaks to the combat system specifically. So if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and do subscribe to my channel for more MMO content. Once again, my name is GRM Adrian and I thank you for watching. Hey there, I'm Batman. You reached the end screen of this video. If you want to subscribe to this channel, click the button in the middle. If you want to watch more videos, click the cards to the left or to the right. Now where's my Robin?